Hi, good afternoon. Almost the end of day 2, and I hope everybody's had a brilliant day so far. Welcome. Thank you for making time to come to this presentation. My name's Corey Elston. I'm a solutions architect with Google Cloud Platform. Now, the title of my presentation today is Securing and Managing Your Big Data Environment, which is a broad title. In fact, an enormously broad title. We could be here until this time tomorrow talking through all the possibilities in this area, which has pluses and minuses to it. Plus side is that I love talking to people and presenting, so I'd be quite happy to go on through the night and do this. The minus side, of course, is that you'd miss out on the festivities in San Francisco this evening, and there's a load of other good presentations that you're going to want to see. So if I weigh the pluses and the minuses, my needs versus your needs, then clearly we should stay strictly to the hour that we've got. And if we're going to stay to the hour, we should set the scene and exchange some context about what we're going to talk about. First of all, securing and managing. What I really mean by this is what will you take away from this presentation? What concrete, actionable, useful information can I give to you in an hour? First step. One of the pleasures of being a solutions architect at Google is I get to work with enterprises of all shapes, sizes, and kinds, from the very largest to the very smallest, to the oldest and most established, to the brand new, in a variety of different industries. And I'm only one person. I'm part of a team where there are tens and tens of people doing the same sort of thing. There are many other teams doing similar jobs. So this presentation is a collation, filtering, and aggregation of all of the things that these people have learned. You will get from this presentation a set of best practices for securing and managing a big data and machine intelligence environment that have been hardened in production and represent a practical, pragmatic, proper way to go about managing and securing an environment that has been used across a variety of organizations and industries. The best practices will cover helping you secure your environment, helping to address and mitigate an existential threat to what we do. A security incident at any point in time is dreadful. It can take your data, your IP, your code, can reduce a hard-earned reputation to rubble in no time flat. So something to be avoided. An aside on security at this point, Google Cloud Platform takes care of many security concerns on your behalf by default. It takes care of a lot for you without you having to do anything. We have a team of over 700 technologists working full-time to make GCP more secure, Google more secure, and the whole of technology better for everybody. But there are some parts of security that require your attention. Take, for example, your data. And of course, some of your data is going to be incredibly private to a few people within your company even. Some to teams, some to parts of the organization, some you'll want to make public. So you're going to have to think about how you configure access control in each of those cases. The access control mechanism exists. You're going to have to configure it. And that's what we're thinking about and talking about in this presentation. It's not the broad realm of fundamental security. I'm sure you've seen some wonderful, insightful presentations already today and going into tomorrow about that. We're talking about your specific requirements and use cases and how we address those. Help you grow quickly. Any time that you spend administering your systems is time that you're not spending on your unique value add. Now, Google Cloud Platform makes it relatively easy to administer things. We try and pay down that effort on your behalf. But still, there is effort involved. Now, as you go forward and you're growing hopefully very quickly, that administrative overhead can become significant. You don't want to be doing that stuff. We'll try and help you. These practices will help you enormously pay that down. Help reduce stress. An oft overlooked, but I think incredibly important part of what we all do is to reduce the amount of stress. These practices will help people to move quickly, fail quickly, succeed, and they help to address situations whereby you and me are sitting at a computer wondering what's going to happen if we execute this SQL. Or if we delete this VM, is it going to affect the group of the people that are working on lifetime value over there? Is it going to hose what they're doing? And so on and so forth. We've all been in that situation. We've all hated it. We never want to go there again. And for future generations, we certainly don't want to keep that sort of style of behavior going. So it helps you in all of those ways. Who are you in the context of this presentation? Well, you're somebody that wants to use the technologies that we have in the cloud, all of those great analytics and machine learning tools. You want to build and create and heroically sort of charge into data and make things happen. And that's awesome, and that applies to all of us in some way, shape, or form, so we'll do just a little bit better than that. You are not necessarily an individual. If you're starting off and looking at code labs, and you should go down to the first floor and look at the code labs, because I was blown away by how good they are. Solutions, tutorials, those things. This presentation will be interesting for you, but it's not squarely on your critical path. But it's interesting for you because you never know. You're obviously investigating with an aim in mind. Neither are you part of an enormous organization that already has infrastructure teams and security teams. Again, this will be interesting and somewhat insightful for you, but it's not squarely in your bullseye either. As an aside, the conversations, if any of you are part of those enormous organizations, we have a slightly different style of conversation. It's about integrating the technologies I talk about today with pre-existing technologies that you already have. Happy to do that if anybody outside of the presentation wants to talk about it. No, essentially, you're everybody else. Small enterprises, medium-sized enterprises, teams within larger enterprises growing quickly in size or in reputation or in influence. You're the next big thing that's coming along. A big data environment. What does your big data environment look like? Here's a premised architecture for big data and machine learning. Google's tools that we're exposing in the cloud. They're all wonderful, they're all highly value additive, and we're very proud of them. But this is not the focus of the presentation today. You're going to use some variation of this that's appropriate to your use cases and your requirements. Again, outside of this presentation, if you want to talk about this in the context of what you're doing, Frigitecture's out there, you have the tree houses, all the booths, a wonderful place to grab Googlers. I'd be happy to do that. We want to talk about, imagine this is your architecture. This architecture in the context of your organization. And what I mean by that is that typically you don't have one system, maybe not even one version of a system. You certainly don't have one individual user. You have a variety of users with disparate skill sets, disparate sets of expertise, and they're all hitting your systems. You typically don't even have one system. You have lots. You have the lifetime value team. You have the recommendation engine team. In banking, I used to work in foreign exchange. You have that team. You have commodities credit, and you have all sorts going on, and dev and test and everything, and that's what we're trying to address. Managing that such that it is secure, transparent, and easy to administer. To establish a hook to hang our hats on, it's useful to talk about an example. For anybody that knows me, actually for all of you, for the people that don't know me, I have a long financial background before this, so I'm going to talk about a financial example. And I'm going to call it example because naming things is super, super hard. Example is a a small, growing financial services company that's doing novel research into financial data. It looks at foreign exchange, the exchange of two currencies at an agreed rate, and it looks at equities, buying and selling shares. Rigorously focused on doing the right thing. So even now, it has a compliance department that oversees everything that's going on. It's interested in the Asian markets for foreign exchange, so it has an Asian portfolio. The US markets for equities, it has a US portfolio. And that's example. It's something that you can all identify with, and it resonates, and you can see how it scales out. You're growing, example's growing, you have more departments coming in, you certainly have more interests and more projects, and it will grow both depth-wise and horizontally as well. A quick checkpoint. We know what we're trying to achieve: security, ease of administration, and minimal stress. You're in the broad middle of the spectrum. Your systems have multiple users, all with different requirements. You have multiple systems, and you're growing, potentially growing rapidly. So what we're going to do next is we're going to overlay the two concepts that we have. We have a premised architecture, we have example. Let's do this mentally to start with. Now, first of all, you have users. I'm going to second myself into example for the purposes of this presentation. You have Corey at example.com. We have Björgsen. We have Keen, we have Froggen, we have Impact, we have all these people at example.com. And those people play that variety of roles. Some of them merely want to view data. Some of them are analysts that are doing our analysis and machine learning. Some of them are administrators that are building the whole thing. And we have expectations of those roles, expectations of the rights that they have, those of a viewer, those of an editor, those of an administrator. And of course, you have the underlying resources: BigQuery, Cloud SQL, Cloud Spanner, and so on and so forth. All of that information leads us to a separation of concerns that then drives our design into the technologies. You have users and groups. Now, a user is essentially an identity. It identifies who somebody is. Group is a collection of users that also has an identity. And we administer and manage these in G Suite. There are other alternatives, but I happen to prefer G Suite. I think it's a great set of tools. We have roles and we have resources. Resources we just referred to. It's all the stuff that we want to use in Google Cloud Platform. Roles are the glue that brings it together. Roles allow us to answer questions such as, can Björgsen, who's a member of our FX analyst group at Example, create a table in BigQuery? And the answer should be yes. Can Corey, who's also a member of FX analysts, delete an equities project? And the answer should be willingly or unwillingly, accidentally or not, no. So now let's have a look at the technologies that we're going to use. G Suite, I'm not going to dwell on this one very much. I've used it quite extensively over the last year or so. Intuitive, easy to use, and I loved it. G Suite Admin Console allows you to manipulate security and users. Google Groups allows you to manipulate groups. Best practices is about all we'll do here. Fully managed users, you can create, suspend, and delete users such that when something becomes apparent to you as an administrator or to your administrator, they can stop people accessing your systems immediately. Password strength. Inside of G Suite, you can both monitor and enforce password strength, and strong passwords are good. Two-factor authentication, again, you can monitor and administer and enforce the use of two-factor authentication. Now, those things, most likely, you regard most of that as common sense, and so do I, and that's great, but actually it pays down a huge threat to your systems. To be able to have an elevated and increased level of confidence that the person using your systems is who they say they are and who you think they are is just great. It helps enormously pay down a threat. Somebody has to know something, username and password, as well as having something, the token for two-factor authentication. And our last best practice is that we do not allow open enrollments to groups that we use for roles in GCP. We'll go through that a bit more, but it makes sense. If we are using groups to somehow control access to GCP and we allow anybody to join any group, then we've achieved nothing whatsoever. Technologies in Google Cloud Platform. Cloud Resource Manager we'll go through first. Cloud Resource Manager is who here went to the earlier session on Cloud Resource Manager? Then I have a treat for you. Cloud Resource Manager is a great idea. It's a relatively simple concept, and what it does is it provides a mechanism for grouping and hierarchically organizing resources. Now, what I mean by that is the following. A resource is owned by a single project with any access for resources between projects having to be specifically set up. Now, what was introduced earlier on in the day is that you can organize projects into folders, and you can nest folders within folders, and then at the top level, your organization owns folders and projects, and GCP sits over the top of all of that. And the powerful concept there is that once you have this in place and you can decompose and model your organization within it, you can start to operate above the level of projects. You can apply things like permissions to folders. You can view all of the permissions and all of the projects that you've got from your organization. Let's think of this in the context of example. As a G Suite customer, example already has an organizational node when it first gets into GCP. Otherwise, you can simply ask for one and you'll get one. Underneath that, we have FX, compliance, and equities folders. Underneath those folders, we create projects for the Asian portfolio and the US portfolio, and also for compliance, because although they're just looking over what we're doing, they will want to do their own analysis, and underneath those, they have their own resources. A question that came up a lot, that comes up, particularly came up in the past a lot, was how do people control the proliferation of stuff in GCP? And usually what they were talking about is projects. Because people had, with the best intentions in mind, people knew that projects were a good entity, a good trust boundary to model what they were doing, and yet they didn't want that administration overhead to scale with the number of projects that they had. Now, the answer to that question now, with Cloud Resource Manager in place, is that you don't have anything to worry about anymore. Embrace a proliferation of projects because it's your friend. It is the right place to have a trust boundary about resources. And now with folders in place, you can begin to operate at higher levels of abstraction than simply projects, so that the administration overhead is not going to scale with projects. Second technology we'll make a lot of use of is Identity and Access Management, Cloud IAM. Now, what Cloud IAM does is it's a way for administrators to specify how identities can interact with resources. I'll explain the concepts here together with the example at the same time. First of all, you have identities. You have users, you have groups, you have service counts, and we're going to think about Froggen at example.com, because he happens to be my favorite. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have resources, and in this case, we're talking about BigQuery. Now, a user can be given a role. Actually, a user can be given multiple roles, but we'll think about this specifically for BigQuery. So a user has a role, they can wear a hat. And in this case, we want that to be BigQuery Data Viewer. Froggen can view data in BigQuery. A role is composed of permissions. It's a collection of lower-level permissions. BigQuery datasets lists, BigQuery datasets get, all of the things that you would intuitively know that a viewer of BigQuery should have. A policy is the collection of all roles that can apply to a resource. Data viewer, data owner, data admin, all of those things that happen. And that chain of relationships allows you to control how a user, how an identity can have a role that's part of a policy that's attached to a resource and dictates how they can interact with that resource. When I started writing this presentation, we were actually going to be interested in two different things. Another announcement that came very recently means that we're going to be interested in three things, and it's good because it's really additive to what you want to do. The first thing we're interested in are primitive roles. Owner, editor, viewer. These are broad umbrella types of role that apply to the whole platform. If you are a viewer, you can view all resources in a GCP project. If you are an editor, you can create and delete resources. If you're an owner, you can create, and you can do anything. You can create and delete projects. You can also apply roles to people, so you can add people in. Those are primitive roles, and a lot of you will be familiar with those. IAM introduces predefined roles, which means that you have a lower level, more granular way of composing a set of roles, such as data viewer, data owner, data flow, developer. You can compose different roles into what you want your user to be able to do. We also now have custom roles, which give you even more control over what goes on. Custom roles simplify things in a number of ways. You can set up, as we're building an example, could create an analyst role. And we can create it from taking underlying permissions, and quite neatly, we can also build it off of other roles. So we could take an existing role and we could say, yeah, but I don't want them to do that, and I don't want them to do that, and I don't want them to do that, but all the rest of it's cool, let that go through. Custom roles are in an open alpha now. You can apply to be part of that. Let's apply this to example. FX analysts at example.com, we will make an editor of foreign exchange. And I want to pause there, because I'm using a primitive role here just because it's easy to write. I'm not implying that this is a best practice. This is just the term that I'll use for the slides, and we'll go into what is the best practice later. Equities analyst, editor of equities, and compliance can view both foreign exchange and equities and as an editor of its own folder, which then means that any projects that we create underneath foreign exchange, for example, any more projects, they inherit the permissions from the folder, from the hierarchy that goes above them. One caveat to bear in mind is that you can give extra permissions at a lower level in the hierarchy. You cannot take permissions away. So you need to bear that in mind as you're building things out. But what it does mean is that as we're creating lots and lots of projects, the administrative overhead goes down. You already have good, solid permissions in place. To this point, we have organized our worlds, and we have established trust within our worlds. And now, as the old adage goes, we'll trust but verify. Audit logging is hyper important. I find that most people, they understand Resource Manager quite quickly, and they identify with IAM, even though the devil's in the detail with IAM, and audit logging is sort of something they also look at. Audit logging's hyper important because there's a couple of things that you can probably guarantee. The one is that as we do the best job we probably can, it's probably going to be some approximation of a good job. And so you will get things wrong. The other thing is that things change over time. We're talking about a growing, evolving enterprise, and things change over time. Audit logging is the physics of what goes on in your system. Who's interacting with resources and who's interacting with data? Who's creating things, who's destroying things, who's accessing things? There's 3 different ways that you can look at audit logging. One of them is in the activity view from the console. That is good, and it is useful, but the reason I dwell over it a little bit is I don't find it the most useful way of doing it. You can also look at it through Stackdriver logging, and that's what I like to do, because there you can specify filters, you can search by date ranges, you can create alerts in Stackdriver, and you can make this truly useful. Because what I implied before is that you should spend, this is hyper important, you should spend time on this, and yet I'm trying to reduce the amount of time that you're spending on administration. And the way you pay down that time is by creating appropriate filters, creating appropriate alerts, because what you want to be working on a forward-looking basis is exceptions, rather than looking at everything that goes on. The final thing that you can do with audit logs is you can export them to Google Cloud Storage or to BigQuery, and you should export them to both, and you should keep that data forever. Because eventually you'll want to investigate something, and certainly you'll want to learn. Your analysts, you'll want to analyze that data to see what you can do better. Checkpoint. Cloud Resource Manager defines a hierarchy, allowing you to group and operate on your projects and resources effectively. Cloud IAM allows you to define roles and policies and apply them to different levels of that hierarchy that you defined with Cloud Resource Manager. Cloud Audit Logging allows you to introspect the physics of your systems. Let's go ahead and build it. Part of what I want to get across in this presentation, because we do have to cover a lot of ground in what we're talking about, is I want to lodge those technologies in your mind so that as you go back and you're looking at GCP, part of what you do is you investigate these technologies. A 20% project for people that want to do well is to go off and learn more. Because we'll try and make it as easy as possible, but the more you know, the better you are. So I want to, I want to try and inspire you to learn more about these things. As I learned more about these things, I was in finance. I come from a classical quant background, and I didn't naturally know these things. I joined Google. I learned about these things. I became far better at my job and far more useful. Ooh. So we're going to do 2 things. We're going to build this thing, and we're going to mix up prerequisites and steady state, and I will try and differentiate between the 2 as we go along. First thing we do is our G Suite administrator creates FX analysts at example.com, equities analysts, and compliance. And they do that in Google Groups, and they ensure that there's not open enrollment to that. And that looks pretty straightforward, because it actually is pretty straightforward. I built it out, and it's pretty straightforward to do that stuff. One of the obvious nice things about G Suite. We can see those groups. We have 3 groups. Part of my secondment is I'm acting as the G Suite administrator, for example. G Suite Admin Console allows us to create and manipulate and monitor users. And again, it's very easy to do that. And we've created Björksen and Froggen and Impact. And the next thing that we do is we map those on to our groups. And the one thing that I'll mention here is that the administrator doesn't need to be a member of the group. I happen to be the administrator of the group, and you can see me as a member of the group there. I don't need to be a member of the group. Because if that was true for all groups, then the G Suite administrator would somehow be a super user of all GCP projects, and that doesn't need to be the case. And now we move on to GCP, and we start to look at our prerequisites for GCP. The first is that we create folders. And our organizational administrator, who, if you think about our separation of concerns, doesn't have to be the same person as the G Suite administrator, can be for very small companies, but you're pretty quickly going to get to the point where these two people will be different, or even these two groups of people will be different. Organization administrator creates FX, equities, and compliance folders. And you can see the organization view here. You can create them in this view. You can also see everything you've created in that view, and it's really neat. But it's not the only way that you can do things on GCP. Typically, there's always those three ways that you can do it. You can do it through the console, you can do it from the command line, or you can do it through a REST API. And it brings up an interesting question for us as to what's the best practice for creating and manipulating these things. Should you do it from the console? Should you do it essentially as a coding exercise? I regard this as a grayer area, because when I talk to people about their preferences here, and then I factored in my own preferences, there isn't a single school of thought about this. I prefer to turn it into a coding exercise, partly because I come from an engineering background, partly because it's reproducible, partly because I can stick it in source code control, and partly because I can write code that tests my code, and I prefer it that way. There's a counter-argument to that, is that creating and modeling your organizations is a relatively static process. You will do it, you will evolve it, but you will evolve it somewhat slowly. And also, it interacts with audit logging. So everything that happens in your system is caught in an audit log. I happen to prefer making it a coding exercise, but perversely in a way, I'm actually going to use the console going through this set of this presentation because I think it's prettier. The white and the blue is nicer to look at than the black and the white. So, folders, prerequisites. Our organizational administrator then maps our groups onto our folders. FX analysts as an editor of FX, equities analysts as an editor of equities, and compliance as a reader of FX and equities and an editor of compliance. And I feel compelled to just call out the fact that those primitive roles are not necessarily the best practice. And you can do that through the same console. And you can do it, and it makes it very easy because you can select multiple entities should you want to. So when you map on compliance, you can just select FX and equities folders and apply the same role to both. So it makes it pretty straightforward. You can look at the IAM view as well. So you can set it up from the organization view. You can look at the IAM page, and you can see what's happening. Now, that was prerequisites. This is steady state. Our organizational administrator creates our project, Asian Portfolio. Asian Portfolio inherits that set of permissions from FX. That means that FX analysts at example.com can create, use, delete resources on GCP, whereas compliance at example.com can only view those resources. So our project creation, and I said be happy and embrace project proliferation of projects, becomes really straightforward. And there you can see the organization view with both projects actually created. Audit logging. Audit logging, as I said before, hyper important. Your organizational administrator, or actually somebody with a special role, a private log viewer role, because you don't want audit logs being widely available. You want that to be a sort of either specialized or a filtered experience to people. You look at the audit logs. You can see them there. Stackdriver logging UI. You can use them there where you will spend the majority of your time drilling in and filtering and creating the right alerts. And what you will do is export everything to BigQuery and GCS and keep all of that stuff forever. One more topic. Access control lists. Access control lists, ACLs, allow you fine-grained control over individual buckets and objects in GCS or over datasets in table in BigQuery. And the reason that that is super useful to what you do going forward is that you will have a situation such as the following coming up quite quickly. With an example, our equities group is expanding, and they're interested in Asian markets, which obviously means that they're interested in exchange rates. As they go from their home country to their Asian markets, they want exchange rates. Who better to give them a fair exchange rate than their buddies in the FX department? But if I apply a role, such as a storage viewer, to equities, I'm allowing them to look at all buckets. I'm giving them that ubiquitously across FX, and I don't want that. ACLs mean that I can specify one bucket, or I can specify one file that I come up with daily. So that's another useful tool for people's arsenals. Boom, we built out example. And it didn't take long, and I hope you see that the administrative overhead that we've sort of incurred in our enterprise is relatively low. And yet, we've decomposed it in a really sensible way. It is secure. It is easy to manage. We achieved our aims in our build of example, but we're not finished. Because I went on and on about it not necessarily being a best practice to use primitive roles, and now I get to sort of unburden myself about that one. Primitive roles are broad-reaching things, and I wouldn't call them legacy, but in some ways I regard them as legacy concepts. They can be useful, but my personal preference is not to use them. I would always use predefined or custom roles now. And I'll give you two examples that will sort of give voice to my discomfort with primitive roles. The first is that if I was to make you an editor of a project, then you can request a quota increase as well. And as an administrator of the organization, it's not totally what I want. I'll be able to stand in front of it because I'll see it in audit logging and I'll be able to stop it and I'll have an alert created for it, but to be honest, it would be better if it just didn't come up. The other example that I'll give you, I've completely forgotten. You give me a minute. It was a good example. It's 6 o'clock. It's 6 o'clock, but this is really all I've done. I've malmed the booze and I've done this. It's not like I've really grafted today. Nope. I'll come back to it in a minute. So, you and I remember. So primitive roles grant broad access, but I don't think that you should use them. Predefined roles and custom roles are very interesting because essentially what we're talking about here is a principle of least privilege. And that's the best way to view these things, is what you would like to start off with is absolutely no permissions. And then the safest thing for you and I and everybody is if you have only those permissions that allow you to do your job. It's good for you because you can't make... I remember, if I make you an editor of the project, you can define firewall rules. And as an analyst, I might not, it's something that you might not want. Again, stand in front of it using audit logging, but again, it's better if it actually didn't come up. Predefined roles would allow you to do that. Predefined roles means that we start from nothing and we layer on roles. I can say that you can administer BigQuery, you can be a Dataflow developer, all of the things that I know you'd want to do as an analyst, those and only those things. And if you ever think of a great reason why you'd want to do firewall rules, then we can have that discussion at that point in time. It's a conscious decision that we take. Custom roles are also useful because you could address both of my concerns by taking the editor role and removing the quota administrator and removing the ability for networks and firewalls, and you can build it up that way. You can also name things in a way that makes more sense to your organization. Variation 2. There will be situations where you will want, possibly, a greater degree of control over encryption. Now, Google gives you, and you've heard this, great encryption by default. We'll encrypt everything at rest, and we'll apply what Google believes to be best practices over that. We'll shard it. We'll put different keys on the shards. We will organize those keys into keychains, and we will rotate those keys frequently. So you couldn't necessarily, the best you can say about your encryption practices is that they're as good as ours are. We regard ours as being as good as there are, and you can do as good as we can. And I want to get it across before we go into the variations. There may be some regulatory requirements that mean that you want a different level of interaction with keys, and there may be some aspect of your company philosophy that puts you in that way as well. And all power to you. So Cloud Key Management Service. What we're doing is a fully managed key management service that you can integrate into your applications, and you can create and maintain hierarchies of keys on GCP. It interacts with Cloud IAM and Audit Logging. So you can have permissions such that only certain people can create keys, and they can be different from the people that can encrypt and decrypt data, and everything that happens here will go into audit logging for you to take a look at. Another option is customer supplied keys. This is where you want the key to be in your hands on your machines effectively, either because of philosophy, or because of a regulatory requirement, or because you have an existing key management infrastructure that you want to keep using. Now, this works for Google Compute Engine and Google Cloud Storage, and it's not completely transparent because there are certain things like you can't upload data to a cloud storage bucket from the console and yet use your own keys. So it's not, it's good, it's not completely seamless, but it allows you to use your own encryption approaches there. We request the key whenever we need to use the key. We use it transiently. We never store that key. There is a cryptographic hash of that key stored that can't be used, obviously, to reconstruct the key. So essentially, we borrow that key from you for a minimal length of time, do what you've asked us to do, and then the key goes. And we came quite a long way in that presentation. And what I wanted to achieve was to sort of get you into the frame of mind that I got into when thinking about these things, to introduce the technologies that I think you should take away and learn more about and become far more expert in, because it's going to help you enormously. And a couple of those things are recent announcements. Custom roles are coming out, and folders, which really is a really prime idea, was announced today. Takeaways. These set of takeaways come best practices. That's the sort of culmination of everything that we've done. Fully managed users, strong passwords, two-factor authentication, full stop, if I had a microphone, because those are things that you want to do. No open enrollment to groups. It just makes perfectly good sense. You can use the console or the command line API for administering organizations and IAM. I prefer using the command line because I can write unit tests for what's going on. And if you go towards using predefined roles and custom roles, then being able to unit test those things is very useful to you going forward. Use an organization to centralize project and resource administration. Use folders to model your organization, grouping like projects together by team or functional area. Use nested folders to model aspects of your organization, development versus production. Something we didn't touch on is a separation of concerns. Folders can also help to model a separation of concerns. It's not hyper important to a lot of what I've done in data analysis, but it is hyper important generally. You may want your developers to be a different set of people entirely. In fact, regulations might mean you absolutely have to have a different set of people entirely looking at development and production. Be happy with the proliferation of projects. It's a good thing for you. So, audit logs. Export audit logs to BigQuery and Google Cloud Storage and keep them indefinitely. Monitor your audit logs, create alerts where appropriate, and use this as feedback for refactoring folders or roles. You can use primitive roles, predefined roles, or custom roles to control access effectively. You should use predefined roles or custom roles. Encryption can be refined with Cloud Key Management, Cloud KMS, or client-supplied keys for particular point use cases. Don't make that your go-to. Make that somewhere where you're sort of pushed to on demand. Honorable mentions from today go to the identity-aware proxy that was released and to data loss prevention, because that's going to be really useful. And I didn't include it because I didn't think it was totally core to what we're talking about, but data prep's really cool as well. For your analysts that are out there working, and my day job is as an analyst sort of working, super important. It's not really management or security, but it is as cool can be. And with that, it's been a pleasure and a privilege. Thank you very much for your time.